Welcome to March of the Ants by Weird City Games. My name's Stephen Carmel and I'm part of the design team for this game. Over the next few minutes, I'll be taking you on a tour of the meadow as we explore setup, rules, and go through some play scenarios. To begin the game, you can see that the black player and the blue player have already set up their nests, and I'm going to do the same. The first thing you need to do is to count 5 eggs from your supply and add them to your larva chamber. When they get added to your nest mat, they become larvae. I also want to make sure I start the game with 2 food, as food allows you to take actions throughout the game. Next, since we're playing a 3 or 4 player game, we're going to start in the season of early spring. So I'm going to take the seasonal marker and add that to the Great Tunnel. Next, I want to make sure that I've added an ant from my supply to the Great Tunnel, and I also want to make sure I add an ant to the score track. We'll keep track of our score throughout the game. And lastly, before we begin, deal 2 cards from the end deck to each player. Now these cards have been shuffled randomly, and we're going to keep them a secret so other players don't know what we hold in our hands. Each season of March of the Ants is comprised of 4 phases: Worker, Soldier, Queen, and Slumber. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Worker phase. The Worker phase is where the majority of the time is spent in each game of March of the Ants, and there are 5 distinct actions you can choose from. The cost for each action is listed on the left-hand side of the tunnel. The first 3 actions cost 1 food. The 4th, play a card, can be paid for in larvae or ants, and resting requires no cost at all. Let's start with Explore. Explore says, draw a hex and place it adjacent to a hex you inhabit. So I would pay a food from my food stores, draw a hex, and choose where I want to place it in the meadow. Now I want to make sure that I connect it using one of these tunnel connectors, and to make sure it's adjacent to a space I inhabit. I'm the red player and I have a red ant in the Great Tunnel, so anywhere that connects will be fine. I choose to place it here, and in doing so, in order to explore it, I move my ant from the Great Tunnel to Underleaf, the hex that I drew. Now I have a difficult decision to make. Do I want to occupy this defender site in order to ensure that I control the hex and thus gain the points at the end of the round? Or do I want to place it on food or larva, the other 2 resource icons on the hex? I'm going to play it safe and go for the card site, which is also the defender spot. The secondary action of Explore says, place 1 larva from your nest onto any hex you inhabit. So the other 2 players in the game, blue and black, would get to decide if they wanted to add an ant to the Great Tunnel. Now we're going to talk about March of the Ants. As you can see, the blue and black nests have also chosen Explore for their first actions of the season. The red player is going to choose March of the Ants, which costs 1 food. So I move food from my stores to the supply, and now I get to move 5 ant steps. Move larvae first, and then ants. The secondary of March of the Ants says move 1 ant 1 step. So unlike the primary action, you can only move an ant that's already in the meadow 1 step. Black is going to stay put, so that maybe during his second action he can explore off the meadow, but blue is going to shore up his defenses by moving into the crevice 1 step. The third action in the worker phase is Forage. You may pay 1 food to draw 2 cards. The secondary is easy, it's gain a larva, so all of the other players would take an egg from their supply and add it to their larva chamber. But let's look at the primary action. I'm going to move this player nest so we can get a closer look at the 3 card types in March of the Ants. The first type of cards we're going to cover are event cards. Event cards are one-time use only and then they disappear. First, I'm going to orient you to the layout of each card. Event cards are bordered in red and have the card type at the top. The title is in italics. This one's called Strange Appetite. The cost is in the upper right-hand corner, which may be paid in either larvae, ants, or any combination thereof. The number and the POW symbol right below the title represents its POW value, for which the card may be discarded to aid you in ant battle, which we'll talk about a little bit more during the soldier phase. Lastly is the main text box, which describes what the card does. Strange Appetite allows you to gain 1 food and draw 1 card. Next, let's talk about evolutions. Evolutions are bordered in green. Again, they have a title and a scientific name. This one is called Tunneling Thorax. The cost is 1 ant or 1 larva. Again, you see the POW value. There's something new in this main text box though. There's an icon in the bottom right hand corner that represents head, thorax, or abdomen. This is a thorax, which you can see there in relief. Tunneling thorax allows your ants to move between any adjacent metohexes, regardless of tunnels. It's a powerful ability for a low cost. Lastly, our colony goal cards. They're bordered in blue, and again they have the same features: a cost, a PAL value, and a title, and the main text box describes what they do. They have both an immediate effect that takes place when you play the card, and a scoring ability that happens during slumber. And those are the three types of cards that you gain by foraging in March of the Ants. The fourth action during the worker phase is the play a card action. Its cost is different than the previous three, which were paid in food. The cost for play a card, of course, is paid in larvae or ants or any combination thereof. First, let's look at event. For this event card, in order to play it, we must have it in our hands and pay 2 ants or larvae or any combination. I'm going to take 2 larvae from my chamber, remove them, play Strange Appetite. When I do, it has the one-time effect of gaining 1 food, which I'll add to my food stores, and to draw 1 card to add to my hand. Those are event cards. The second type of card you can play is an evolution. This evolution costs 1 ant or larva to play. I'm going to remove 1 larva from my chamber in order to add this evolution to my thorax on my player nest mat. Evolutions have several different effects. Of course, there's the text box that describes what this particular evolution does. And when you add an evolution to your nest mat, all of the ants in your colony gain those abilities. Secondly, are cast bonuses. Cast bonuses are listed here at the bottom of the player nest mat. For thoraxes, it says the cost of event cards is reduced by 1 per thorax evolution. So if I would have been able to play this first, Strange Appetite, instead of costing 2, would have only cost 1 to play. The last kind of card I'd like to talk about is the Colony Goal card, which again has the cost in the upper right hand corner. When I do that, I get to play the Colony Goal card. It has 2 effects. The first is immediate. It says place 2 larvae into the Great Tunnel. So I'm going to take these 2 larvae from my chamber. They become ants in the Great Tunnel. Secondarily, it says each slumber gain 2 victory points if you have the most ants in the Great Tunnel. So I get to stash this Colony Goal card here on the right side of my player mat to remind me to check during the slumber phase to see if I've met its victory conditions so that I can record the points on the scoring track. The secondary of play a card says discard a card to draw a card. So each of the other players in the game, if they have at least 1 card in hand, can discard that card to draw 1 card at random from the ant deck, cycling and filtering their hand. The last action available during the worker phase is resting. In March of the Ants, any player may choose to rest at any time, but it's most often done after you've run out of food or cards and need to end your worker phase to prepare for the next turn. The first nest to rest becomes the starting nest. So if red rested first, they would gain the starting player token to remind everyone that they would begin the next turn. After resting, you may only rest on your following turns and gain 1 resource each time. In March of the Ants, the worker phase ends after the first 2 players have rested, no matter how many players are in the game. If 1 other player rests, the worker phase ends, and we add those resources. The second phase in March of the Ants is the soldier phase. During the soldier phase, ant battle takes place in each contested hex. A hex is considered contested if there are more ants from at least 2 separate colonies than there are collection sites. In this hex, blue and red are going to have an ant battle. The first thing that happens is you determine army size, which is simply the number of ants in the hex. Blue has 3 and red has 2. Next, you determine battle strength. Battle strength, starting with the invader, is determined by the PAL value of the card that they discard. The red player's card has a PAL value of 2, while the blue player's card has a PAL value of 3, giving them a total battle strength of 6, while red only has a total battle strength of 4. So, the blue player wins. The army size of the blue player is 3, so they get to destroy 2 of the red ants. Now casualties happen simultaneously, so the red player, as the losing colony, gets to destroy ants equal to half of their army size rounded down. The blue nest, because they won the battle, also gain a victory point. The third phase in March of the Ants is the queen phase, broken down into 3 different parts. First, we're going to harvest. Harvest is when you get to collect resources from all of the collection sites that you inhabit in the meadow. As the red player, I don't collect any resources in the Great Tunnel, but I do get to collect 1 food and draw 1 card from the ant deck. So I add those resources to my hand and to my player nest mat. After harvesting, collecting your resources, you feed your ants. 1 food feeds 4 ants. So I look out onto the meadow and I count the total number of ants, 2 here and 2 in the Great Tunnel, for a total of 4. So I take 1 food from my stores, put it into the supply, feeding all of my ants successfully. Lastly, in the queen phase, is the royal decree. The royal decree helps you plan your next turn, deciding what you get to do. I can either gain 2 food or 5 larvae. Inside of my nest mat, I have no food and I only have 1 larva, but I do have some extra ants hanging out on the board, so I know I'll probably be able to march or explore with them next turn, so I'm going to choose 2 food, and that's the queen phase. Lastly, before the next season begins, is slumber. There are 2 parts of slumber. The first says, score stashed colony goals. The red player has stashed Bound to the Past, which reads, each slumber gain 2 victory points if you have the most ants in the Great Tunnel. So I look to check. While the black player only has 1, the red has 2. So I get to advance the red ant 2 places on the scoring track to score that colony goal. Secondly, you gain 1 victory point for each meadow hex you control. And our meadow hex is any hex connected to the Great Tunnel directly. So I would get to move 1 more space on the scoring track. And lastly, before the next worker phase begins and we start the whole dance over again, I advance the round marker to the second turn of the game. Red was also the first player to pass. He has the first player token, and he would begin the next worker phase. Well, thank you for joining me for this brief introduction to March of the Ants. Hopefully, through the setup and rules overview that we've just gone through, you've gotten a better sense of how the game plays. That was the first season. There would be 3 more in a 3 or 4 player game. Now, we covered most of the basic rules. There's some exciting things that we didn't get to talk about. Centipedes, wormholes, and tons more evolutions, events, and colony goals. Please check out the rules, post in the forums, and we look forward to sharing more about the game with you in the near future. Thank you.